So the most important thing, in my opinion, is classification. Who are you? What are you? If you're an agency, say you're an agency. If you're a software vendor, say you're a software vendor. If you're a marketplace, say you're a marketplace. Why? You have to bring your own context. And two, you need to tell them how to buy from you. You just have to tell them, whether you do it on the call or you do it in the email or however it comes together. But if you're not having the explicitly saying, this is how people purchase from us. We are doing an information call now. If your problem set fits our solution set, that's great. We'll talk through pricing a little bit. If you're a pricing upfront guy like we are, great. If you're a pricing later person, then you explain that process, great. We're going to do this, then we're going to do that, and then we're going to talk with this. And here are the places where things get tripped up. Sometimes IT folks have a lot of questions, but don't worry, we have a lot of information. I'm happy to do a one-on-one meeting with them to go over that. You're explaining them how they buy. And then once you sign the contract, yay, this is what happens next.
Welcome to the B2B Digital Marketer Podcast, a podcast helping you to end your struggle with digital marketing, helping you to pave a new and better path to target and capture your ideal customer. Each week, we teach you how insiders and experts debunk the dreary and become engines of innovation. Now, here's your host, Jim Rembach.
Okay, B2B DM gang. Hey, we're going to have a good discussion today because I think, as I jokingly told him when we had a podcast pre-flight, is that I think I found a brother from another mother because we have a lot of similar beliefs in regards to, and I guess I'd say unorthodox beliefs in some of the things that are currently happening in the B2B world. Benny has the audacious opportunity to actually work with 80 different B2B firms to make sure that their sales messages and communications are getting into the inbox. Many of these firms are actually venture-backed. So when you think about a venture-backed type of firm, needless to say, the stakes, quite frankly, are just ratcheted up a little bit more. You have a third party who, just is demanding some performance and may not really care about what's going on in the day-to-day. But before we get into that, Benny, if you could share a little bit about your background, I think that would be really cool.
Sure. About my background. That sounds fun. I have my degree in music originally. And from music, I got really into what was happening in the music industry at the time, which was there was a new direct relationship between artists and fans that didn't really exist before, thanks to the rise of social media. And that relationship sort of spun thing on its head and created an opening for me to create a company that connected. At the time I had moved to Japan, I was living in Japan, the Western artists directly to their Japanese fans. And I was in my early 20s. And that's how, my friends who are listening, you become an accidental B2B marketer. You start to say, well, I'm really interested in helping Western artists connect with Japanese fans. Who are the gatekeepers? And then you say, okay, well, there's all these record labels. I guess I need to go talk to these record labels. So in an instant, boom, you're a B2B marketer, even though you're a 24-year-old, 23-year-old or whatever, however old I was, that was very interested in music and very interested in fan relationships. So I made my way into the major labels and ended up signing deals in Japan with almost all the major labels, Universal, Sony, Warner. Many of those deals were totally done on the fly, no sense of cost of goods sold, no sense of pricing. I remember one of the early pricing conversations I had with Universal, and I'm sure some of the folks listening to this will chuckle to themselves. I actually hadn't considered how much I would charge for what I pitched. So when they said, well, that sounds interesting, how would you charge for that? The only number I could think of was my rent at the time, which was 84,000 yen. So I said, how about 84,000 yen per month? And he was like, that sounds reasonable. Okay, let's give it a go. And I was like, yes. But from there, I grew that business out and I sold it. And that again was another B2B outbound process. The next company I started was also in the B2B space. We ended up failing miserably, but same game. Okay, open field, left side of the spreadsheet, you have all the companies that you're interested in. On the right side, you have an empty list of the number of companies that you've reached out to or had a meeting with. How are you going to move things from the left side to the right side in the most efficient way possible? And it was around this time I had a mentor who opened my eyes to the fact that people are receptive to cold messaging. Because it doesn't really occur to you. You think, well, who's going to reply to a cold email from me? I'm nobody. But this mentor said, that's not really how it works. That's not how it's perceived from the other side. And we could talk about how cold emails are perceived by people who are, in a position to receive them happily. We can dig into that. But at that point, he showed me some of the mechanics of it, and I got really into cold email. When I eventually shut that business down, I turned my attention on my friends who were founders, most of them venture-backed founders at the time, and said, hey, what do you need help with? They said, you're good at cold email. Help us with that. It's a bit of a mess. And I said, okay. So that was 2016. I started doing cold email professionally in that sense. And then in 2020, cold email started to get harder, started to get weirder, started to get more technical. And I turned my attention to the technical side of cold email, whereas where we've really built my company, which is called Senders, our reputation, and where the vast majority of the 80 companies that we can currently serve rely on us for. And that's the technical expertise on the various aspects of email, which are, there's only a few of them, which is IP addresses, domains, DNS records, and then all the soft stuff. How many emails you're sending, what do the emails say, what are the intervals you're sending, and that kind of stuff. So we specialize in those 4 elements of email, and we've built a pretty sizable business with a happy team serving all these companies and trying to help them achieve their business goals. That's it. That's my whole life, guys. You did it. I got married somewhere in there, but that's basically it.
Well,
now I'm based in New York City, so in Brooklyn. Brooklyn, New York.
Very good. Well, thanks for the download of the life, but there's a whole lot of activity in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there.
A lot of stories. I mean, you and I chatted for quite a while, talking about all of these different perspectives, and to me, it goes back from that original artistic, trained, mind and desire, and the music and the connection.
Perhaps, yeah.
I mean, it's really interesting. I've had the opportunity to be podcasting for over a decade, and the things that we find passion for, I think that in itself is extremely unique, and how people go about that and how it evolves. And I mean, your story was one of evolution, but ultimately still comes back to that whole artistic element in regards to how are these emails potentially being attractive, and then therefore singing and resonating, right?
Sure.
Because part of the discussion that you and I had previously that we absolutely need to bring into this one was talking about that whole humanity piece.
Yes.
Okay, so talking about the changes in humanity, talking about the changes in technology, all of those things, even in that timeline within the past decade, has been quite significant. We're still learning how the whole COVID lockdown has impacted us. In B2B, it was an immense, impact. You have, scenario now where remote buying teams are increasing in number, meaning that, hey, there used to be essentially, 4 people maybe in a decision-making process, depending on the size of the spend. Now that's doubled and even tripled in a lot of organizations. And so when I'm thinking about the demands, and when you start talking about the whole venture backed and all of that, and thinking about these whole sales emails, and you really just mentioned 4 things that kind of were the critical elements. I started thinking, well, first of all, where's the disconnect? Because as an entire, let's just say subset of the marketplace, meaning B2B high ticket sales, where are they delusional? Also, too, I think we have a problem with myopia. So, I mean, give us some insights into some of these things that are causing people to go astray.
Sure.
And creating it to where some of those targets, like you're talking about, they're not even touching their inbox at all. It's like, I'm done with that. And so then you have sales leaders and marketing leaders saying, Well, email's dead. It doesn't work
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah. It's a fascinating, the whole declaring things dead ultimately only helps the people that find success with things
Mm.
because it sort of clears the decks for the folks that are rushing in to do something. I think that here's what defines most of the companies that we work with that are doing really, really well. And it's not going to be what the listener is thinking I'm going to say. They understand their cost per lead. They understand how many leads they need to sustain their businesses. There might be some soft stuff involved. For example, they just hired a new sales guy and they want to keep him busy. That's actually less common than we hired the sales guy or girl or whatever. We know they need to be having 10 conversations per week where 8 of them are quality and then it goes on from there. But it goes even further. It really comes down to what do they need in order to hit their goals for that quarter, that half, that year. Where is this whole machine moving? And where are the leads originating from, and how are we supposed to diversify the lead sources? And when I say cost per lead, I think it's shocking how many companies I talk with that are young that don't even have a sense of cost per lead. They go, well, zero. It's like, okay, well, if you have a $0 cost per lead, let's mathematically, it's tricky to deal with zero. So let's say it's a $1 cost per lead. Great. You successfully have a business where you have one source of leads that's very, 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 very inexpensive. Congratulations. That statistically means that if you're aiming for a $300 cost per lead, you can spend up to $6,000 or whatever the number is, on your leads, and the average will average out to $300. And they're like, well, I'm never going to do that. And like, okay, so you're not actually thinking about this mathematically. You're not thinking about balancing out your lead sources, because you might say we do 4 conferences a year and it generates 20 leads, and that's amazing. Great. Well, COVID happens. No more conferences. You go down to 0. So that's not a defensible position. So you say, we're going to throw in LinkedIn outbound, we're going to throw in cold email outbound. Great. Each one of those has costs associated with it. You're looking at a sort of average cost per lead. And when you bring in a vendor like me or a vendor like you, Jim, and all of a sudden you add a cost on top of it, it's not the end of the world. It just changes the cost per lead calculations. And if you have a good month, the cost per lead changes. And a bad month, the cost per lead changes. And if something happens down the pipeline where it gets harder to sell deals, or the deals get smaller or the deals get bigger, that changes the cost per lead calculation, et cetera, et cetera. So most of the companies that we end up working with are ones that say, we have explicitly understand our cost per lead, and we can invest in making sure that our cold email lead channel continues to perform as it is, or improves, or we increase the volume because that will this expected change, or it used to work and it doesn't work, and now we want you guys to fix it and make it work again. But this is all implied, or all has an impact downstream on cost per lead, cost per deal, lifetime value, all these other things. So it's a real understanding of the business metrics at their core, and understanding that you're going to have some leads that are actually very expensive, and that's okay, and some leads that are practically free. CEO went to business school with a bunch of people. Awesome. Free leads. Love them. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to some sort of calculation. And so I would say that anyone that declares email is dead likely isn't maybe in their context, businesses, the email is dead. Hey, it's not providing any leads at a reasonable price anymore. Okay. Roll it out, get it off your books, reduce the cost. But no one's really stopping emailing. They might say, hey, we need to reduce investment in it for that purpose. Someone else might say, hey, email's working really well for us. Of course, the devil's in the details. Like, what exactly do we mean by email in these contexts? Because email, it's sort of like saying, spoken word doesn't work for me anymore. You're like, okay, yeah, talking doesn't work for our team anymore. We're not doing any more talking. It's like, that would be a very strange thing to say. And email is basically that primitive at this point.
Okay.
Let me go on a little bit of a monologue there.
But I tell you, a lot of what you were talking about, I can resonate with, being somebody who double majored in finance and real estate.
Finance and real estate. You're talking to a music guy here.
I know, but let me tell you what, you were just spouting out a whole lot of finance type stuff that to me is characteristic of what you would find in, a venture-backed firm. They're running the business by the numbers. And even when you were talking I know from my days selling customized research programs where we were measuring the customer experience, the understanding of the whole financial aspects of retention, you know, acquisition, both on the employee and the customer side.
Yeah.
You're talking, you know, a foreign language to most people, and they and just kind of like you were saying, they put an inflated impact on something because they didn't understand, you know, the whole return element.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I don't do a lot of mentoring because I have all these clients and I like to spend my time with my clients. So I try to keep activities I do within that realm. But I had a relatively new-ish entrepreneur. They weren't a young person, but they were relatively new to the game, saying, "Hey, we have a really important meeting coming up with a key potential partner. Let me like show you the presentation." I'm sure, Jim, you've done a lot of this in your life too. And they had one slide that was like, "This is how it will help you with renewals with your clients." Because it's a partner that they were, and I was like, yeah, just delete the other 9 slides. Like that's the only thing they're going to care about anyway. You know what I mean? Just like get on the call and say, I understand that you have a whole bunch of renewals coming up. We have a solution that you can add to your offering that will make it more likely for them to renew. And they'd say, they're very interested, right? That's it. That's the whole game. Because you get that renewal. If it's a $12,000 annual contract, could be 20,000, could be 200,000, could be 2 million. You get one more annual renewal, the lifetime value has doubled. The cost per lead has more than halved, right? All of a sudden, you have a business that lives, that breathes. So they were joking, like, really just delete the other 8 slides. I was like, well, no, after they ask you the offering that you will do to help them extend the lifetime value, then you go through the ins and outs of it. And of course, that meeting went very well. And maybe it would have gone well anyway, because it was on the 8th or 9th slide. But that's really the clincher. How is this going to actually impact the business that person is trying to do and trying to run? The thinner that gets and the more emotional that gets, in my opinion, the less likely that client is to join with you and stay with you. Does that make sense?
I think you need to elaborate on that because first of all, what you were talking about and what you're explaining, I've had people say that that's your money slide.
Okay,
right?
Interesting.
So your money slide, and it doesn't mean that it's talking dollars as far as expense. Sure. It's talking about that whole, ROI and impact and all of that.
Yeah.
That's the important one. This is your money slide, and everything else is supporting statements. But what you just said in regards to that whole emotional element, and can you elaborate on that a little bit?
I think that one of the reasons why people like me, and maybe you yourself as well, although I shouldn't speak for you, are attracted to B2B is that everyone understands in B2B that setting aside the emotion is where you get to good things. In other words, if I do work of instilling fear in you in email deliverability, make you afraid that your emails might be going to spam, and this whole specter of, you're only getting a 32% open rate. I mean, how many of those are going to spam? That kind of game, it stirs emotions that could lead down the path to a sale. But in my opinion, that's not as potent in B2B as saying, let's assume you don't have an email deliverability problem. Let's just talk about what would happen if you switch to us as a vendor. What will happen if your email program stays exactly as it is? Like, let's make some assumptions. Let's assume that 20% of emails aren't going to spam. Let's assume that you switch to us and nothing changes. That to me is where you start to get business people that build the mental scaffolding they need to make a decision like switching a vendor or making a decision. There's emotions that can play into it. A little bit of those emotions do play, and they always do. But I think that emotions tend to dissipate once things get to the buying committee. You mentioned 4 people, 5 people, 8 people have a say in these things. Well, do you think the 6th person is going to share the fear impact or no? So it has to, the lowest common denominator has to be the specifics of solving a problem or enhancing something that needs to be enhanced. And because of that, it's relatively easy, in my opinion, to do it. Now, where the emotion comes in is, do they like you? Do they want you to be the partner? Because we might all tell ourselves a story that I don't have any competitors at all. There's no other ways to do it. We're seeing more and more, and perhaps you're seeing this yourself, Jim, and I'm sure people listening have this experience. More and more people are not choosing you and not choosing anything. I think, Jim, you said this in a podcast, didn't you? We're talking about that. It goes to indecision or non-decision. That's where deals are dying more and more these days. So you say, hey, I see you have a steaming pile of trash next to your house that's smelling really bad. Would you like to pay me $20 to remove it? They're not paying $20 to someone else to remove it. You walk by there, it's still there. It's there a month later, it's there 2 months later, it's there 3 months later, it's there 6 months later. Maybe there's a new CMO comes into town and then goes, hey, we need to clean up this piece of trash. And then they go out and find someone, and maybe they find you again and you get the deal. But more and more people are not deciding. So I think that's where the emotion comes in, where someone says, okay, I'm willing to go down the buying path with you because I find you to be credible. I find you to be not repulsive. I find you to be nice, interesting, or just okay enough, just safe enough, whatever the feeling is that they feel. That's, to me, where the emotion comes in. But after that, it's a lot of mechanics. And as a seller, you can be the one that helps them work through lifetime value conversations and mechanics and makes a spreadsheet that helps them. You don't have to be the one that tells them, oh, all of our clients get a 200% decrease in cost with these things. You can draw the numbers out of them. Well, what do you think is a reasonable amount that you think you'll save if you use this versus that? Great. We'll factor that into the deck that goes on to the rest of the buying committee or whatever,
Okay. So as you're explaining that, I think there's a couple things that we probably need to focus in on. And because I think your approach and the way that you were talking about it really are trust building factors.
Yeah, sure.
So a lot of the indecision and the loss has to even more so these days than ever before, go into the personal credibility bucket.
Sure.
So in other words,
I can see that.
If I am going to endorse, if I am going to say yes, if I am going to recommend, if I am going to do all those things, dang it, I'm going to make sure that I'm putting, all of my money in the right bank.
Sure.
And it's not going to fold on me.
Yeah.
Because my reputation goes in the tank. My next time where I'm trying to get something, bought into goes in the tank. And so
That's interesting.
There's a lot of emotional factors that exist that aren't what they used to be and aren't the same in B2C. Because I would even dare to say that the emotional factors and the bar that we have to get over are even significantly higher in B2B because of that.
That's
You're going to ruin my reputation if you screw up. And I
have a slightly different feeling about this. It's probably the same conclusion as you, but it's a slightly different feeling.
Right.
As I talked about earlier, I started my career in Japan and doing business in a foreign language. This is not universal, so I'm not going to make a statement like Japanese people are this or that, because that never flies. And once you've lived in a foreign country long enough, you meet all different types of people in all different sizes and shapes. One common trend I figured out, or that I sensed, that I felt, were that a lot of the people I was doing business with were deliberately attempting to make it hard for me to make a judgment on them immediately. So you take actions to what I call suspend their judgment. So I'll give you an example. Let's make up a fictitious scenario. Let's say you have a client and that client is having an email deliverability issue. You're not super keen on bringing an outside partner in to help. You know that they have a complicated buying process. IT person's pretty powerful. The CEO is involved in everything, which usually means that things are going to move slower than they normally do, et cetera, et cetera. So you and I are having a conversation. My only goal is to suspend your judgment that I won't be a good fit for the organization or introduce me and will create a problem. So I'm going to do everything I can in the conversation without being manipulative. Just be like, I'll talk with them. I won't push anything on them. I'll give them advice for free. I'll help them understand it, contextualize the problem. I'll help with this. And then you're like, okay, yeah, I can see how this isn't going to be a problem for me. The next conversation, let's say it's the CEO and the VP of sales, and the IT person's not there and the compliance person isn't there. Now I'm doing the same game again. I'm trying to give them enough information, and and I'm positioning this in such a way where, hey, it's not going to become a compliance nightmare if I talk with the compliance person, and IT people usually like us. Why? Here's why. So I'm actually I'm like, you might think that I'm a little bit abrasive. You might think that what we're offering is a little bit expensive. You might, but you don't have to make a conclusion. You can suspend your judgment now until we speak with everyone. And then, of course, when you talk with those people, you're essentially doing the reverse. You're saying, this is what the CEO said and why they've expressed concerns. And this is how busy they know you are, which is why, or you can draw that information out of them. And what the end of the day is, you've done a good job suspending everyone's disbelief, or suspending everyone, not disbelief, that's not right. Suspending everyone's judgment of you to the point where now you have a very even playing field where you can try to close the deal. Now, closing is a whole different conversation, especially in my realm. We probably close deals a little bit differently than other people close deals, and those people close different than other people and down the line. But at least in terms of getting this judgment suspension happening, that's important. What I see with cold email is the people who write judgmental sounding emails oftentimes don't get past that first hump. You understand what I mean? If they don't present the credibility and they sort of say, hey, we're going to save you, 300% of this. It's like, well, that just doesn't comport with my business. How are you supposed to add $27,000 per week in additional bottom line? This doesn't make any sense. This doesn't even pass my first level of judgment. So how is it supposed to get through the second and the third and potentially the fourth level of judgment? So having a kind of approaching it on your back foot a little bit, and approaching it and reading the emails that you're writing, or approaching the conversation with someone with a very clear understanding of how they might judge you and how they might make the decision really quickly out of your favor, is probably a smart thing to do just in general, I think. And in some ways, the fact that I didn't have a price in mind when I was 23, 24, and I walked into a meeting with the international music department at Universal Music might have helped me. It might have helped me because I wasn't saying, this is the amount of money that I'm going in for. It was solutions based. This is what I'm thinking. What do you think? What are you doing with Justin Bieber's? The fact that Justin Bieber has such an active Twitter presence in the United States, but it's not being represented in Japan. Oh, we haven't really thought too much about that. Okay, well, how's Justin Bieber doing in Japan? It's actually doing quite well. We're really growing a great fan base here. That's interesting. Well, do you think it would be helpful if we brought some of those tweets into Japanese on a regular basis, maybe like 2 to 5 of them a day? Yeah, I think that could be kind of interesting and cool. It's worth trying. Okay. So you're getting through this process, and then close to the end, he's saying like, you don't seem like someone that's going to create problems once I introduce you to the marketing person, or this person, that person, that all these other approvals that I'm going to have to go through. Yeah, that sounds good. Oh, by the way, what would you want to charge for this kind of thing? Well, it's like you're building the scaffolding in their brain for them to be like, okay, this isn't going to be worst case scenario. We'll tell this young gentleman no, and he'll move along, or we'll do it in-house instead, or whatever. So anyway, this is part of the thing that I always encourage our clients to think about too. As they're reading through their emails, they're saying, are you forcing them to make a decision, or are you getting them to the next sentence in sort of an easy way? Are you giving them a date time? How's Tuesday at 2 p.m.? Well, now you're giving them homework to do. They got to check their calendar. Do they really want to talk with you next Tuesday? It's kind of a little bit, I don't know. Tuesday at 4, I have to leave work a little early because my whatever, it's like you're kind of like forcing them into this weird position where they're not even saying no to your value proposition. They're literally just like, Tuesday's not good. Like, I don't know. So anyway, I think a lot about that. I don't know. Probably other people have vastly different opinions. Like, you want to get people to decision quickly. You want to turn your champion into your champion right away. That just hasn't been the way that I've ever done business and seen work. Well, how about you, Jim? How do you feel about it?
I would dare to say that that type of playbook is where there have been the most struggles, and has contributed to the 60% plus rate of indecision, loss to indecision.
Yeah.
And I think the construct that you were talking about in regards to mental scaffolding
Mm.
is critically important. And to me, when you start talking about senior level people within organizations, you really have to create an environment by which they're drawing conclusions,
Sure.
and you're helping to essentially give them what they need in order to be able to come to that conclusion.
Yep.
And then what you said also too is critically important in regards to that whole journey process. When other people start coming into it, is the natural tendency is to push it forward. Sometimes, that's the worst attempt, which is not going to help you from a mental scaffolding perspective. Sometimes you have to just go back and, like you said, work on pulling other people into it, and then also referencing those previous conversations with those people. And again, continuing to build the scaffolding of conclusion.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that knowledge of one of the things I'm right now, I'm 39. So I'm like, not, that just means that you've been around, you've seen enough. I know you're older than me. You've seen even more than I have. I think that what we're talking about really is being able to imagine all the conversations, and having been involved in a lot of the conversations, that you are giving them information to have on their own. So if you've ever been in a conversation with a CFO or watched a conversation with a CFO, you see how the CFO thinks. I mean, the CFOs all think differently, of course, but you can sort of understand the pathway that things go in CFO land. And you also, oftentimes people who are very smart with pricing understand how CFO level people think, or VP of finance, depending on the kind of organization it is. And you start to understand, okay, I'll give you like a real example that, of course, very well. We're talking about a cost per lead. Cost per lead is the whole universe of leads fractionalized down to an individual lead. That's it. 1,000 leads come in. If you have $1,000 spent to get 1,000 leads, that's $1 cost per lead on average across all of them. That's just the math. If you're selling a $25,000 thing and they have 25 salespeople, they're probably going to fractionalize it to be $1,000 per year per salesperson in their brain. That's where you end up with all these like, oh, it's $80 per month per salesperson kind of pricing. It's not because it's $80 per month per salesperson. Really, it's because you're doing the accordion back and forth of going the target price or the price that makes sense and fractions. So the reason why I'm saying that is that's an example of how a person who understands pricing or has been in those conversations has thought through all these things. Same thing goes with reputation. What is it about? What is the one piece of reputation that the VP of sales is going to bring into the VP of finance meeting to get the sign off on this piece of software? In our case, one of our biggest partners is a big software platform called Apollo.io, and they're a partner of ours. And we're published places on their website, and I've done a webinar with them, et cetera, et cetera. So that's likely one of the only pieces of information. Or they go, yeah, that seems reasonable. Yeah, we can fit it within the budget. But who are these people? Oh, they came from Apollo, or they're partners with Apollo. Okay, sounds reasonable. We have a long relationship with Apollo. We pay them every month or every quarter, every year. These guys can also be someone we pay. That sounds fine. So that information isn't going to be derived from the ether. Oftentimes you have to tell your champion or tell the person you're talking with, oh, when you're explaining to them our credibility, you should probably mention that we're partners with Apollo, because that makes it easy. You should probably mention that whatever, this isn't the case with us, but if you're a software, you should probably mention that we have that we're a platinum certified HubSpot vendor, and that's why we're the right people to do this integration. Oh yeah, that's a good point. I will make sure that I bring that up in the conversation. You should mention them that it's really only $50 per sales rep per month if you bring the price down to a per rep basis, even though it's not how we charge. You really should mention this is only going to increase your cost per lead by $12. Right? Like you're like giving this person the information that they're like, that's correct. I understand how to bring this into my org and sort of set it up correctly.
Well, I would dare to speak. Those are such important, and it even happens on the back end when they do become a customer and they are happy is when you want them to actually refer other business to you, you have to tell them how they would do that.
Yeah.
Make it easy for them, right?
I always tell this, and sometimes this analogy lands and sometimes it doesn't, but maybe it'll work. I live in Brooklyn, New York. We're both in the United States of America. If you walk into a restaurant and there is not a please wait to be seated sign, the chances that you guess wrong how to do things is pretty high. If you sit down, someone's going to yell at you, hey, wait to be seated. Come on, we'll seat you. You stand around, someone's like, why are you standing around? Choose a table. You walk up to the bar to order, they say, no, we have table service. Sit at a table and the waiter will come. Right. Oh, sorry, it's 3 p.m. We're in between lunch and dinner now. Like the door's open, but we're not serving anything. So in other words, we've eaten in restaurants our entire life, but we don't know how to buy. And the people who work there know how to sell. They know how to sell. So when we get on a sales call, or all my clients get on a sales call, or all my clients send out cold emails or whatever it is to solicit these things, we know how to sell and they don't know how to buy. So the most important thing, in my opinion, is classification. Who are you? What are you? If you're an agency, say you're an agency. If you're a software vendor, say you're a software vendor. If you're a marketplace, say you're a marketplace. Why? You have to bring your own context. And two, you need to tell them how to buy from you. You just have to tell them, whether you do it on the call or you do it in the email or however it comes together. But if you're not having the explicitly saying, this is how people purchase from us. We are doing an information call now. If your problem set fits our solution set, that's great. We'll talk through pricing a little bit. If you're a pricing upfront guy like we are, great. If you're a pricing later person, then you explain that process, great. We're going to do this, then we're going to do that, and then we're going to talk about this. And here are the places where things get tripped up. Sometimes IT folks have a lot of questions, but don't worry, we have a lot of information. I'm happy to do a one-on-one meeting with them to go over that. You're explaining them how they buy. And then once you sign the contract, yay, this is what happens next. All these things, maybe you don't have to go into an intense amount of detail, but they do not know how to buy what you're selling. They do not know what you are. They just don't. They don't know. So I always think like bringing it down, you got to bring your own context and you got to really boil things down to the basic building blocks of whatever you're doing. Well, and I think, yeah, go on. I was going to go. I'm on a roll. So sorry, you got me.
Well, no, hold on. I think there's an important point here when you start talking about the whole humanity and being able to come to a conclusion and make a decision, and therefore all these different factors in regards to problem solving is, as humans, our brain fills in gaps. We don't sit there with just crickets. I mean, it always tries to find our brain always tries to find an answer for us. So, when you start talking about context, when you start talking about all those things, especially in today's world where we have TMI, entirely too much information, a lot of conflicting information, a lot of, marketing, hype and all that stuff. I mean, is, organic really organic? It just goes on and on and on. Is you have to, to me, you have to oftentimes correct a wrong, perception.
Yeah.
So, you talk about building, the right perception. You talk about, hitting, the elements that don't put you in a bad state or a bad position. But what about having to reverse previous thought? And I'll give you this example.
That's really good. That's a really interesting point.
And I'll give you this example. So there's one organization that I know of that they are selling a unique solution into a market that has a 96% penetration rate. So everybody's got this type of solution. But they're bringing, and talk about perspectives, they're bringing a very different perspective, very different technology approach, and they're getting some significant gains from it. But again, going back to, I'm an organization, I only have so much time, I only have so much resources. There's certain things that I just absolutely must do. And so timing is important. You're not going to get my attention. In other words, we already had that box checked. right?
Yep.
I don't, I ain't got time for this. So we have to outseat, or we have to,
Unseat. Yeah.
overturn, unseat. Thank you. A false perception of what that solution really could be, or, is, or it is from us. How do you address that?
So that's a really great question. I think that in cold emails, for example, doing cold outreach, which oftentimes is common, cold calls probably work similarly, although I don't claim to be an expert in cold calling. You need to call out the elephant in the room. You need to say it in some way or another. You need to acknowledge that the first thing they're going to think of is that. And if you don't call that out, it's very, very strange. They're going to reply with, "We already have a solution. Thank you. No, thank you. No, thank you." Because people open their email, it's cold, they look at it, they're looking for a reason to not engage with you anyway. Keep in mind, if there is an incumbent player that is dominant, but also kind of crap or whatever it is, and you do have a credible, then you know exactly the thrust of the email or the communication. Oh, and if it were in a call scenario, you would be like, "Oh, I understand that you use, Azure for your cloud, and you've built your whole thing around Azure. And I'm going to tell you why you should, you're not saying this, but I'm going to tell you why you should use this alternative that would be painful in some way." If you don't call that out, the whole time they're going to be like, "I'm going to stop right there. We use Microsoft for all those services, and we're fine there," right? So I think that having the confidence to call it out is actually really important. It also helps to build credibility fast. And also you can use language like, "Unlike blank, we are blank, 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 and blank." These are pretty powerful sentences. Companies switch from blank to us in these circumstances. Well, that's pretty straightforward. We're seeing more and more companies turn away from long-standing relationships with LexisNexis and opting instead to go with us. Even though we're new, we're proving to be more ABC than companies like LexisNexis. So you're bringing it right into the conversation. You're creating distance. You're using that as a pushing off point. And like that's a pretty powerful place to stand from and look from. It also forces the person to not say no based on that first line objection. Keep in mind, to abstract this out slightly, or to sort of widen it out, I think that any first order objection should be addressed as early as humanly possible. Any first order objection. In other words, budget objections can be if you think, "Hey, we go out to market, but everyone thinks that they don't have budget for this," well, then you address this. Many companies we talk with believe they don't have budget for it, but after they work with our team, they find that X, right? Wow, okay. If they have there's an incumbent player, 98% of the market is dominated by this incumbent player, but the 2% use us, and here's why. Okay, that's a little bit salesy in the way I phrased it, but you're calling out a first order objection. You might think that your director of IT would never sign off on something like this, but here's why directors of IT actually love us. First order objection. And if you're a business owner or a salesperson and you don't really keep track of the first order objections, they're usually in your gut. They're in your soul. It's sort of the bane of your existence, this first order objection. And if you're sort of like, I'm not, maybe it's a little bit too abstract. If you want to know the first order objection for my business, you can look on my LinkedIn. I have 1 or 2 LinkedIn posts that have gone viral, and it says, and the number one that has gone viral is explaining why you should not be sending cold emails from Google. Because the thing that we'd hear over and over again is, "Oh, we send emails from Google. They flag us, they suspend us from time to time, but the deliverability is good and we really want to stay there." So you know who I have to, sort of go against, or in a sense. Obviously we do something different than Google, and it's a little bit more nuanced, but that's the sort of thing where I go, "Oh, another person that says sending from Google's fine. Okay." Right? So I think, I think that calling out first order objections is usually a really important habit to get into.
So I want to actually dig into that a little bit, because like a lot of those false assumptions that you're talking about, hey, we send Google, we go through Google. I mean, there's a whole lot of issues with that, like you're saying. But before we do that, to add on to what you were talking about in regards to that first order of objection, Chris Beal, who is one of those experts in the cold calling side, stated that they found the most success that one of the first things that they have in their script as far as that opening is to say, "Hey, I know I'm an interruption."
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
he said,
First order of objection.
first order of objection. Hey, I know I'm an interruption.
But keep in mind that vocally that can work really well. Cold emails, you got to realize that with a cold email, almost any wasted space on preambles doesn't really serve you well, right? Because it's a little bit like somehow it doesn't humanize you to say things like that. I know that this email is cold and you didn't solicit it. And it's like, yeah, go away. It's sort of a feeling with cold email.
I think that's totally right.
Yeah,
so it's context.
Yeah.
And to me,
context,
yeah. Context is huge. And then what they do is after that, they say, do you have 17 seconds to actually,
that's too cute for me, but I understand
this is what he said has worked for them.
Yeah.
17 seconds for me to share with you why I am interrupting.
Well, keep in mind that just to bounce off what you're saying to me now, and not to discount the expertise of this person at all. There's so much context that comes that exists in any sales interaction. So much context and so much lack of context. And you actually don't know their context as well as you think you do. And they don't know your context as well as you think you do.
That's very true.
In some ways, it's sort of like, it feels a lot like if I just said a random word to you, if I said screwdriver, your brain is like, but if I said screwdriver, I need a screwdriver, can I borrow one? You're like, yeah, you live near me. Like you can come by and borrow a screwdriver, right? If I say a screwdriver, I'd like to buy one. You still don't have enough context. Maybe Google a hardware store. Like, what are you talking about? And I'd be like, electric screwdriver. Should I buy it from Amazon? Like the context, in a void of context, the brain races, and you're trying to reconcile it and you can't. So one of the elements of context I think is really important is to understand if you're selling to the type of company and the type of entity that is attracted to kitschy, funky little things like numbers like 17 seconds. For example, if you're selling into healthcare, well, nothing gets done in 17 seconds, 17 minutes, 170 minutes, 17, right? So anything like, can I have 15 minutes of your time? Those people, I mean, I'm painting with a very broad brush here, have not done a meeting that's only lasted 15 minutes ever. You might spend 10 minutes just doing context before you even get to the substance of the meeting, and that might take another 20 minutes, for example. So coming in really good, can I have 5 minutes of your time, might not actually make sense for the context of your email. Now, if you're I can't think of a clever example, but there are contexts in which that sort of odd number might catch someone in an interesting way that works for your target audience. I don't know if you're cold calling contractors or something.
Well, this gets back into the whole testing of things and looking at yet more analytics and numbers. I'm sure that's part of an important component in your deliverables and work is to see what is resonating and the impacts and doing all kinds of split testing. So you mentioned something about the whole technology piece about sending through Google and all that, and I want to make sure we touch on.
Yeah, we can talk more about email deliverability. We haven't even slid down that rabbit hole. That's a wild one.
And it is, but you made it sound quite simple when we first started talking. You're like, oh, it's really these 4 things, boom, 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 and you just rattle them all off.
Sure. Yeah. The devil certainly is in the details for sure. Yeah.
So when I start looking at false beliefs,
sure,
where do a lot of the false beliefs reside in those 4 things that you mentioned earlier?
Oh, that's a fascinating question. So most folks those who are listening think about email, and it's a mix of things. If they're marketers, they might say like, yeah, I use MailChimp for emailing, or ActiveCampaign or HubSpot or something. If they're sales folks, they'd say, yeah, we do our emailing from Google, or we use Apollo.io for emailing, or whatever it is. Email itself is a bundle of things. And if you're playing in someone else's bundle, if you're using ActiveCampaign for emailing, you're playing by their rules. They get to decide which IP addresses are being sent from. They get to decide a whole bunch of different elements of this. If you're trying to really, it's sort of like if you buy one of these Teslas or something. The Tesla is the Tesla. I don't think they're offering upgrades or changes. You can't swap out the stereo system for another one. You can't bring it to a shop and turn it into something cool, which people used to do with their cars when they were more mechanical and less digital. If you really want to rev cold email hard and you really want to be able to send 1,000 to 4,000 cold emails a day, which is where a lot of our clients need to go. They have very large total addressable markets. They know what they're doing and why they're going after them. You can't use stock tools. You can't just cruise up with a Google account, turn it on and send 1,000 emails a day. Google, that's just not what it's for. You can't use ActiveCampaign for that. ActiveCampaign doesn't allow cold email, unsolicited emails. They only do opt-in emails. So you get this bounce back effect. Either deliverability suffers, sendability suffers, they're flagging you. So what we do is we separate out all the elements of email into those elements of IP addresses. We manage IP addresses on behalf of our clients to make sure they're happy, healthy, they can sustain the levels of emailing that they're doing. We're rotating IP addresses, whether it's an array of IP addresses, etc. Domains, we're working with subdomains. We're looking for the kinds of aged domains that they might have, alternate domains that are aged, understanding the age of domains and how that relates to things, which domains are in play, which domains aren't, and then the DNS records, which is SPF, DMARC, DKIM, making sure there's no misalignment, etc. down the line. So yeah, email itself is very simple, but it's sort of like if you said, hey, I bought a car, you'd be like, cool. It's a Ford Pinto. It can only go 65 miles per hour. Say, great. Very different from I bought a kit and I'm like putting together my own car, but it's probably going to be able to go a lot faster than a Pinto. It's just going to be able to do a lot more. So that's why what we're constantly doing is explaining to people how the stock thing that they have just isn't the right tool for the job. And the actual tool for the job is actually a set of tools that we can bring to the table and assemble for them in a way that will end up serving them better in the long run. Is it more expensive? Yeah, it's a lot more expensive. A Google account is $12 a month, and our smallest pricing at this stage is $1,200 per month. Wow, that's a very significant price difference. If you think that a single Google account can do what we do, then why would you ever purchase from us? Doesn't make any sense, Well, so anyway, that's like really on the technical side of email. And my call to everyone who's listening is if you have an email deliverability problem or you think you do, feel free to reach out to my team. We're happy to have a look, free of charge. We don't charge for helping you figure out if you have an email delivery or sending problem. So anytime. Senders.co is the domain. You can reach out to me directly, benny@senders.co.
So I think that's the first part is,
that's my call to action.
Well, that's, and it's an important one. I mean, and so, well,
because sometimes people's eyes glaze over. They go, oh, I don't even know. Is this something I have to care about? Or I say, if you're not sure if you have to care about it, that's fine. We can help you figure out if this is something you need to care about.
Well, it's one of those, to me, it's akin to my many years that was spent in the customer service world when, people were talking about the customer experience that was being delivered, via their customer service operations. And so, the question that sometimes I came to is, have you ever called into your own service center?
Wow.
And they would just look at you funny. And it's like, okay, we have all this set of feedback from your customers. You're saying and thinking one thing, and they're saying something, quite different. Have you ever even gone through the experience yourself? And if you're talking about email and email deliverability, have you even gone through your own email experience yourself?
Yeah.
I think that's a first step into hopefully gaining
also
impact.
I think that the perspective, humans are really awesome in that we have intense powers of imagination. And even just, if you're the type of person that never wears hats, take a baseball hat put on your head and then say, okay, now I'm VP of sales that I'm trying to sell into. Let's read the email from that person's perspective. Let's go word by word. Let's be a skeptic. Let's go through this and be skeptical. If you're not doing these with your own sales emails, you're probably not, doing yourself a favor. That level of skepticism really matters.
Well, and you could call it that. For me, it's like, I need to do a better job of avoiding delusion.
Okay. Yeah. You mean self-delusion from the customer's perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things that we had talked about previously, again, was the level of comprehension. So when we talked about, helping people to come to a conclusion, talked about, hitting, that first objection, order of objection. But you and I had a conversation in regards to connecting, and that the level of comprehension, we have to be extremely mindful of that. And so you said something to me that was actually even more, I guess you'd say, conservative than what I had as an approach. So when you start talking about that whole level of comprehension and how you need to, construct your copy, give us a little bit of insight into that.
When we were talking, what was the example? Do you remember the example that we had a discrepancy on?
Well, it wasn't it. So for me, I said something about a fourth grade reading comprehension level, and you said, well, most of the stuff that we're doing is on the third grade.
Maybe I did say something like that. Well, okay. So sophistication is actually a really important topic. And I think a lot of this has to do with who you're emailing and what you're saying. I think that, as I alluded to before, they don't know what you're selling, even the category of it, because it's a low context environment. And they don't know how to buy from you, even if what you're saying sounds somewhat interesting. So on those elements, we're talking third grade reading level, basically. Like, we are a subscription SaaS service. That means you pay monthly on a per rep basis or something, is like the level we're talking. Very, very straightforward. Now, if you're a technical product or a sophisticated product, or it's important for them to understand what differentiates you, and those are technical, and that requires big boy words, you have to use those big boy words to explain the differentiation. So I would say that have an extra emphasis on the things that should be easy to comprehend, make them absurdly easy to comprehend. Things like, I would love the chance to talk to you. Okay. When we talk, I will go into more detail and also explain pricing and examples of clients that we're working with and how it's turning out. Okay. Pretty straightforward sentence. But if the sentence before that is about the technicalities, make sure that that's also very accurate and fine and not written, in a dumb way, I would say. So try to make the simple things as simple as possible. Don't confuse them. Well, wait, what are you? Are you an agency? Is this a public service announcement? Like, are you trying to sell me something? Or because believe it or not, folks, there are a lot of emails that aren't really that transactional at all. People get a lot of emails that are like, hi, Jim, I saw you're a member of blah organization. I just joined that organization. I'm really excited for all the events, and I want to send a note around to introduce myself. See you at the next event, Jim, Benny. And you're like, cool, Benny, nice to meet you. See you around. And the next email from you is a kind of confusing one that they're not sure if you're an agency, if you're a software vendor, if you're an implementation partner, if you're a custom solution maker, if you're what do you do? What you said makes sense, but so I would say simplify as much as you possibly can, to the point where at least they know what they're saying no to.
Most definitely. Well, I'd say a whole lot of information in regards to how we can turn things around in regards to our success from a sales email perspective, and the whole contextual component and the humanity of it. Well,
keep in mind that, Jim, one of the things that we talked about last time is how, by offering something like a industry roundtable, a conversation, you're actually moving the emphasis away from the value proposition of your product. Because again, you say a value proposition that might make a lot of sense. They hear all the issues they're going to have getting it through the CFO, arm, the finance arm, the CEO arm, the this arm, the that arm. So their urge to say no isn't really driven from lack of interest. You come to them with a CEO or an executive roundtable discussion, you're suspending their judgment on whether they can get your solution through a complicated process. And it's a whole new world. They go, I'd love to participate in a conversation. And of course, through that process, you're doing all the things that build up the scaffolding in their brain for them to then have the confidence to bring it through to their org. So that's a total context shift, and it suspends their defenses. So if you're thinking about this in the context of like a peer roundtable, you're still going to have to deal with first order and second order objections, but those objections are to their participation in something. So you might, an example you and I chatted about, because I don't know if this fits with what your team actually does or doesn't do, but the idea of saying, everyone tends to have a chance to speak. Although if you don't feel like speaking, it's not a requirement. There might be like, ooh, I'm not really big on public speaking. Oh, well, they said that I don't have to speak. Now, you and I both know you get in the roundtable, people get excited. They're going to turn on their mics because they have something to say. But that's a first order objection. Like, ooh, cameras are optional, by the way. Oh, well, that's nice because sometimes it's uncomfortable on camera because I look at myself all that. Okay, great. First order objection. People don't like to be on camera all the time. Next one might be, we don't record the conversation and we ask everyone to keep the information shared confidential. Okay, well, that's another objection that I was going to have to participating in this. Same process. And in past meetings, we've had leaders from companies like A, B, and C participate. Oh, well, those companies have higher security standards than even my company does. Okay. So what you're doing, it's the same exact process, but you're shifting the conversation away from the context of like, is this a software product or whatever it is that you think you can actually get through the buying committee and get to the good stuff or not, which tends to perform very well. And that's another thing we see a lot of our clients really succeed with is shifting the context away to suspend early judgment of whether this is a good idea or a not good idea.
And that's in today's world, that's a critical element in regards to helping people to draw new conclusions.
That's right.
It really is. So getting, as they say, getting the ultimate outcome isn't always, through the front door. And you have to be mindful of that, talking about the whole contextual piece. Well, Benny, Rubin, fantastic conversation.
This was fun, Jim.
We covered
a lot of ground.
We sure did.
I'm interested in folks who have differing opinions and push back on this. I don't know, where are you going to be posting this video?
So we actually post on YouTube, and we share snippets. And also, as far as the podcast is concerned, it's released on several different podcast platforms, including the Apple Podcasts, Google, and
awesome.
Amazon.
Find it on YouTube. Make a comment. Tell me where you think I'm off base. Tell me an example of when I was totally wrong. That could be interesting. And if I miss it, Jim, collect them all, and then we can reply in another context.
Well, absolutely can do that. And in the meantime, how does the B2B DM gang get in touch with you?
Oh, they can email me, benny@senders.co, BENNY. Senders.co is the home for my team on the web. Add me on LinkedIn, send me a note, tell me where I'm wrong.
Rubin, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you for joining us. Go now to join the B2B DM gang in the B2B Marketer LinkedIn group, where you can connect with other B2B DM disruptors and get access to our B2B DM cheat sheets, checklist, and guides. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, please help by going to iTunes to rate, review, and subscribe. And share the show on all of your digital platforms. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode. And always remember, you can automate your lead capture, but you must lure your lead.